Welcome to my channel, where every story pulls you into a new mystery, every case tests your instincts, and every clue brings us one step closer to the truth. In today's case, we follow Hercule Poirot as he steps into the Chromatic glass Menagerie, a haunting gallery where vibrant glass creatures shimmer with secrets, and one shattered figurine whispers of a crime hidden behind color and reflection. Stay with me till the end, because in this investigation, every glow hides a lie, every shard hides a motive, and the final reveal will leave you questioning what was real and what was merely a trick of the light. So, pick up your cup of tea and get comfortable, because today's case is worth every second until the very end. Chapter 1. A Disturbance at Renfield Hall. The first scream pierced the glass conservatory like the shattering of crystal, sudden, shrill, and utterly incongruous with the serenity of Renfield Hall's annual garden fete. It had been, until that moment, a pleasant affair. Beneath a summer blue sky, guests milled about Lady Tremain's manicured grounds, sipping elderflower wine and admiring the floral arches draped in blooming wisteria. A string quartet played beneath a cream marquee, and the air buzzed with the kind of privileged ennui one finds only at English country estates. But the scream, high and unmistakably female, silenced everything. Even the cellist's bow froze mid-air. Guests turned sharply, their parasols dipping, their conversations dying. The sound had come from the east wing, from the infamous glass menagerie room. Miss Iris Marsh, Lady Tremain's niece, was the first to emerge, pale as the bone-handled fan in her trembling fingers. "He's dead," she gasped. "He's fallen, he's—" The words failed her. She looked down at her gloved hands, which still clutched a delicate glass hummingbird. By the time Major Elridge and 2 footmen had flung open the conservatory doors, a flurry of guests had followed, all eager to see what horror had intruded upon their cucumber sandwiches. Inside, dappled sunlight streamed through jewel-toned panes, crimson, gold, and aquamarine, casting eerie patterns on the marble floor. At the center of the room, where a semicircle of plinths once stood in perfect symmetry, now lay chaos. Among a web of broken violet glass shards, sprawled awkwardly, was Professor Gideon Lichfield. A renowned antiquarian and Lady Tremain's weekend guest, he now lay with his head twisted at an unnatural angle, one outstretched hand clutching at nothing. Blood trickled beneath his temple. A shattered amethyst glass panther, one of the collection's most prized pieces, lay broken beside him. From the threshold, Lady Tremain observed with grim distaste. Though her frame was slight and her cane pronounced, she bore the bearing of an empress. "For heaven's sake, Gideon," she murmured with cold irritation. "Always one for the dramatics." "Lady Tremain, he's not moving," Major Elridge said grimly, crouching beside the body. "No pulse. I think he's dead," she finished with a sigh. "Yes. I rather feared it." She turned to her butler. "Flinch, call the police. And kindly make sure no one touches the exhibits." But the damage had already begun. Guests whispered. The glimmering glass sculptures, famed across Europe for their chromatic precision and historical mystery, suddenly felt ominous. Worse yet, it was swiftly noticed that one was missing: the prism-glass cobra, centerpiece of the collection, and Lady Tremain's most treasured possession. 3 hours later, a small figure disembarked from the 2:18 train at Renfield-on-the-Avon. Hercule Poirot wore a dove-gray suit with a silk tie perfectly centered beneath his precisely waxed mustache. In one hand he carried a leather valise and in the other, a paper-wrapped bouquet of hothouse camellias, gifts for his reluctant rural retreat. His mood, however, did not match the flowers. "I do not care for the countryside, Hastings," he had said only the day before. "Too much air, not enough order. One feels exposed to chaos." Though Captain Hastings was not with him on this occasion, delayed by an affair in Surrey, Poirot had agreed to visit Lady Tremain at her express invitation. "You must come," her letter had insisted. "For rest, for fresh air, and perhaps, though I say it lightly, for a touch of your unique perception. Renfield is not without its peculiarities." Now, as he stepped into the carriage that awaited him at the station, Poirot could not shake the faint sensation that something awaited him, something neither restful nor ordinary. By the time he arrived at Renfield Hall, the party was over. The guests were gone, the quartet dismissed, and a constable stood awkwardly near the east wing, gripping a notepad with more confusion than authority. Poirot was greeted by Flinch, who bowed with the gravity of a funeral director. "There has been an incident, sir," he said softly. Poirot blinked. "An incident? Ah, your English is always so tactful. Let me guess, someone has died." "Yes, sir. A guest. Professor Lichfield." "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured. "I should have known." The tranquility, It is never so perfect unless it hides something. He followed Flinch through echoing corridors, through sunlight-tinged silence that felt suddenly sinister. In the blue salon, Lady Tremaine awaited him, perched like a porcelain figure on a high-backed peacock chair. "Poirot," she said without preamble, "there has been a death. But I do not believe in accidents. Not in my house. You will stay and you will find the truth." Poirot inclined his head. "Then I am no longer on holiday, madam," he said with quiet certainty. "I am at work. Let us begin." Chapter 2, The First Clues. The glass menagerie room had been cordoned off with a velvet rope by the time Hercule Poirot entered. A constable, clearly unnerved by the task of guarding a room full of fragile art and recent death, stiffened as the detective approached. Poirot gave him a polite nod and stepped beneath the rope with the faintest sigh. The room shimmered with light refracted through colored panes, ruby, emerald, topaz. What might have once been enchanting now felt macabre, like walking through a kaleidoscope of mourning. The broken remains of the amethyst glass panther had been swept to the side, placed carefully on a silk cloth, though Poirot noted with a faint frown that one shard, a curved fragment, had been missed. It lay in the shadows just under a rosewood display cabinet. He crouched, retrieved it delicately with a silk handkerchief and turned it over in the light. The edge was clean, sharp, too sharp for a fall from only 3 feet. "Curious," he murmured. From the far corner, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. Inspector Frobisher entered with a brisk stride, clearly not pleased to find the famous Belgian already at work. "Poirot," he said, "I was told you were merely here for a restful visit." "And yet," Poirot replied, "murder, it seems, is less inclined to take a holiday." Frobisher sniffed. "No murder." The man slipped, cracked his head on the base of the sculpture. "Dreadful accident." Poirot's gaze fell to the marble floor. "And what do we say about the missing cobra?" Frobisher stiffened. "Yes, that is odd. Lady Tremaine insists it was here this morning. Now the cushion is empty." Poirot walked to the empty plinth. The velvet was slightly disturbed, as if something had been lifted carefully, not knocked away in panic or haste. No broken glass. No sign of a struggle. "A thief does not risk a crowd," Poirot murmured. "Unless—" He stopped, his mustache twitching slightly. He turned to Frobisher. "May I see the professor's possessions?" "Already catalogued. We found his briefcase in the guest wing. Papers, notes, nothing of value. And his room, untouched." Poirot said nothing for a moment. His gaze turned to the room's arrangement, circular, with each sculpture placed equidistantly. Except, no, not quite. The plinth where the cobra had sat was slightly off-angle, as though it had been rotated just a degree or two. "Has anyone dusted for fingerprints?" he asked softly. Frobisher gave a tight smile. "There are prints everywhere, Poirot. This place was crawling with guests. It's a conservatory and a showcase. Dozens of people touched things today." Poirot nodded absently, eyes scanning the walls. "Tell me about the professor." "Gideon Lichfield. Historian. Wrote some niche works on medieval glassmaking. Lady Tremaine invited him 2 months ago, she says, to advise on the origin of the cobra piece." "Why this particular one?" "She claims it's of Byzantine origin. Perhaps older. Lichfield was here to confirm its provenance. He dined with the house often, but spent most of his time here or in the library. Quiet sort, rather severe." Poirot's brow furrowed. "And did he confirm her belief?" "Not yet. According to Lady Tremaine, he was to give her his final report this very evening." "Ah." Poirot's voice was soft. "And now he is dead." Before he could speak. Later that evening, Poirot stood at the threshold of the guest hallway. A maid, young and visibly shaken, guided him to Lichfield's room. "Miss Marsh asked me to take you, sir," she said nervously. "She said you'd be methodical." Poirot offered her a gentle smile. "Merci, mademoiselle." Inside the room, everything was meticulously arranged. Not an item out of place. The desk bore only a single ink blotter, a capped fountain pen and a closed folder. Poirot flipped it open. Inside were sketches of the cobra sculpture, labeled in small, cramped handwriting. Marginal notes in Latin. Below the final drawing was a sentence, underlined twice in red, "Forged." But why so elaborate? Poirot's eyes gleamed. He turned to the bed. Upon the side table was a photograph in a silver frame, a younger version of Lichfield standing beside a woman, her face partially obscured by a sun hat. She had striking hands, long, delicate fingers adorned with rings. Poirot studied the photograph for a long moment before returning it to its place. Then as he turned to leave, something under the desk caught his eye, a torn scrap of notepaper folded once and crumpled. He retrieved it carefully and smoothed it open. I cannot be part of this anymore. I know what you did. It was never about the glass. There was no signature. No adresse. But Poirot's mind was already at work. Back in the great drawing room, a fire crackled and Lady Tremaine poured herself a brandy, steady hands betraying no emotion. Find anything interesting, monsieur? She asked, voice cool. Poirot bowed slightly. Only that your Professor Litchfield was very close to a discovery. One he did not live to share. Her eyes narrowed. You think someone murdered him to silence him? Poirot shrugged. I think someone wished he would be silenced, yes. But whether his death was by accident, design, or misdirection, that, madam, remains to be seen. Chapter 3, The Gathering of Suspects. By the following morning, Renfield Hall had transformed from a country estate into a stage of quiet suspicion. The guests who remained were not many, but each bore an uneasy awareness of the other, of what had been said, what had not, and what might now be guessed. Breakfast was a subdued affair in the sunlit dining room, where the scent of toast and marmalade did little to mask the tension thickening in the air. Lady Tremaine presided at the head of the long walnut table, as composed as ever, dressed in a dove-gray silk gown with a jet pendant glinting at her throat. She made no reference to the tragedy of the previous day, only requested that the kedgeree be kept warm for the Major, who was always late. Poirot, seated halfway down the table, sipped black coffee with an air of quiet observation. He had spent the early hours reviewing the professor's notes once more and had carefully reread the anonymous note retrieved from Litchfield's waste bin. It still smelled faintly of lavender ink. Now, he turned his attention to the remaining inhabitants of the hall. To Lady Tremaine's right sat Miss Iris Marsh, her niece and heiress presumptive. 26 and striking, Iris wore grief with the theatrical air of someone who had spent the night rehearsing how best to wear it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she stirred her tea, though Poirot noted that her makeup was as precise as ever. Iris had been the first to find the body. Her shock yesterday had seemed genuine, but shock alone was no alibi. Across from her sat Major Alton Elrich, a former military man with an overly erect posture and a voice that could cut through stone. He dabbed his mustache with a napkin and cleared his throat with self-importance. Dreadful business, he muttered, not for the first time. Terrible end for an old scholar. Damn peculiar accident, though. Lady Tremaine raised a brow but did not reply. To Iris's left sat Mr. Nathaniel Parr, a bespectacled solicitor from Bath, invited for the weekend to review certain legal matters on behalf of Lady Tremaine. He was thin-lipped and fidgeted often with the salt cellar. Poirot had noticed that Parr had kept almost entirely to himself since arriving. And finally, at the end of the table, sat Mrs. Winifred Vale, Lady Tremaine's companion and former governess to Iris. Elderly, stooped, and perpetually swathed in lavender shawls, she gave off the impression of someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by the misfortunes of the world. Poirot set his cup down gently. If I may, Lady Tremaine, he said, his voice mild, I would like to speak privately with each of you over the course of the day. All eyes turned toward him. I am not the police, he continued calmly. But if someone in this house bears a secret, I promise you it will not rest long. The truth, Amias Amos, has a most irritating habit of bubbling to the surface. There was a pause. Lady Tremaine sipped her tea without so much as a raised eyebrow. Of course, Poirot. You have my complete cooperation. Major Elridge grunted. I've nothing to hide. Parr nodded mutely while Mrs. Vale said only, We are all at your disposal, monsieur. Poirot bowed faintly. Bon. Then let us begin. He chose to start with Iris Marsh. In the blue morning room, she sat with her arms folded, one foot tapping with suppressed agitation. I suppose you think I had something to do with it, she said before he had spoken a word. Not at all, Poirot replied, settling into an armchair. But I believe you saw more than you admit. She hesitated. I didn't see anything. I went in to fetch Aunt Letitia's spectacles. The professor was lying there, the panther was broken, and then I screamed. You were fond of the professor? She looked startled. Fond? No, not in that way. He was clever, yes, but odd. He made me uncomfortable. He asked questions, took notes, stared at the sculptures like they were people. And yet, you fetched Lady Tremaine's spectacles from a room you knew he often occupied? They weren't in her room, she said. And no one's supposed to touch the sculptures without gloves. He always said that. Perhaps someone did. Poirot watched her closely. And what of the missing cobra? Her lips parted slightly. I didn't even notice it was gone until later. But I heard voices in the corridor before I entered the conservatory. Low voices. One of them might have been male. Did you recognize them? She shook her head. No. But someone else was there before me. I'm certain of it. Poirot gave her a small nod. Merci, mademoiselle. That will do for now. By noon, he had spoken with Major Elridge, who dismissed the professor as a pompous know-it-all with a fondness for secrets. With Mr. Parr, who claimed to know nothing of the man at all. And with Mrs. Vale, who confessed quietly that the professor had seemed frightened in his last days, checking locks, double-checking sculptures, and once asking her whether Lady Tremaine had ever replaced a piece with a replica. As Poirot returned to his room, a thought lingered. Someone in Renfield Hall was lying. And the cobra was not the only thing missing. Chapter 4, Poirot observes. That afternoon, Hercule Poirot requested the freedom to move about the estate. Lady Tremaine, ever the composed hostess, even in the wake of murder, agreed without hesitation, though she added with a half-smile, "Do watch your step, monsieur. Renfield has a way of revealing more than it intends." Poirot, cane in hand and mustaches freshly waxed, began his examination not with the glass menagerie, nor with the victim's room, but with the corridors themselves. The psychology of crime, he often said, lives not only in words but in footprints, objects left just so, and the absences where something ought to be. He walked slowly through the eastern hallway where Lichfield had last been seen alive. The walls here were hung with framed watercolors, floral studies, impressionistic and muted. To the average eye the space was unremarkable. To Poirot it was a gallery of tiny contradictions. He paused at the second painting, Wild Poppies, Cornwall. Its frame bore a faint smear along the bottom edge. A fingerprint? Grease? It was too faint to identify, but it was recent. Poirot leaned closer. A faint scent of lavender clung to it. Lavender again. Continuing down the corridor he passed a set of double doors, locked. A drawing room used only for formal guests. The brass handle bore scratches around the keyhole, old and worn, but curiously the dust on the doorframe had been disturbed. Someone had tried the door recently. Or perhaps opened it. He made a mental note. Later, in the small library, Poirot found Mr. Nathaniel Parr hunched over a decanter of port, his jacket rumpled and his expression tense. "You are fond of solitude, monsieur?" Poirot remarked, drawing up a nearby chair. Parr started. "Oh, yes. I find all this overwhelming. Not quite the restful country weekend I was promised." "You are here on business?" "Yes, Lady Tremaine has been discussing alterations to her will. Nothing finalized." He sipped. "The professor's death has rather thrown everything into confusion." "Indeed. Did you know him?" Parr hesitated. "Only by reputation. We spoke briefly. He struck me as aloof, though I think he knew more than he let on." Poirot watched the solicitor's eyes carefully. "And what of the sculptures?" Parr gave a strange smile. "Honestly, they make me uneasy. All those bright, staring eyes and coiled poses. Lady Tremaine is quite obsessed with them." Poirot allowed the moment to breathe. "Do you believe in forgery, Monsieur Parr?" Parr blinked. "What? Of course. It happens in art, antiquities all the time. Then perhaps it also happens here." Parr's eyes flickered, and he finished his port in a single swallow. Poirot stood. "Merci, monsieur. I find you most helpful." Outside, in the south gardens, Poirot encountered Iris Marsh seated alone by a white iron bench, her face turned to the hedgerows. The wind tugged lightly at her scarf. "You spoke of voices yesterday," he said gently. "Low voices in the corridor." Iris turned. "Yes. I couldn't tell who, but one was definitely a man. The other might have been Winifred. She has that soft way of speaking, always whispering." Poirot sat beside her. "Tell me, your aunt, does she confide in you?" Iris gave a mirthless laugh. "Letitia confide? Never. I'm her duty, not her companion. She has flinched for that. Or Winifred when she's feeling generous. And yet, she has made you her heir." Iris looked at him, startled. "How did you?" Poirot lifted a hand. "An instinct, mademoiselle. But I imagine that position comes with complications. She threatens to change her will every time I disappoint her. Which is often. I think she likes the power it gives her." Poirot tilted his head. "And what would happen if someone else were named? A companion, perhaps? Or a devoted advisor?" Her eyes darkened. "Then I suppose I'd be free. Or ruined. Depending on who it was." Poirot rose, gently adjusting his cuffs. "Merci, Miss Marsh. You are most illuminating." In the drawing room, Poirot found Flinch polishing a silver vase with mechanical precision. Such lovely craftsmanship, Poirot murmured, examining the design. Lady Tremaine collects beauty in all its forms, does she not? Flinch looked up. She does, sir. Beauty and precision. And what of value? Poirot added softly. Monetary value, I mean. Flinch's polishing slowed. She doesn't care about that. Not in the way others might. She believes true art is priceless, unless, of course, someone insults her intelligence. Then she'll sell it out of spite. Poirot's brow rose. She sold pieces? One. A Murano swan. Claimed it was a fake and sent it back to the dealer in Florence. Said it offended her. Was it truly a fake? I wouldn't know, sir. But it wasn't long after Professor Litchfield arrived. He spent hours with each piece. He took particular interest in the cobra. Poirot's voice dropped to a murmur. And did he find something worth hiding? Flinch paused. If he did, he didn't tell her yet. He said he needed one more day. Poirot nodded once. And now that day is gone. By dusk, Poirot stood once more in the glass menagerie room, staring at the empty pedestal where the cobra had once glistened. So, we have ambition, he whispered. We have secrecy. We have a stolen object and a man silenced. He ran a finger along the rim of the pedestal. It bore no dust. The sculpture had not simply been taken. It had been chosen. Removed carefully. Deliberately. And whoever took it believed it was worth the risk of murder. Chapter 5. Initial interviews begin. The following morning brought with it a thin mist across the grounds of Renfield Hall, blurring the outline of the rose garden and casting a gauzy light through the arched windows of the breakfast room. Poirot took his coffee alone, seated in a position from which he could observe every entrance and every expression. It was time he decided to turn the wheel a little. To press, not with accusations but with delicate pressure. The truth, like steam, always escaped through the smallest cracks. He began with Mrs. Winifred Vale, who awaited him in the drawing-room, swaddled in her habitual lavender wool, a faint tremor in her gloved hands. It's very strange, monsieur, she said softly. I've been in this house for most of my life, first as Iris's governess, then as Letitia's companion. I never thought I would see blood on the floor of the conservatory. You noticed the professor behaving oddly in the days before his death? Poirot asked. She gave a small nod. He was distracted. Nervous even. Always watching the collection. And late at night, I once found him scribbling notes by the light of the fire. When I approached, he snatched them away as if I had caught him in sin. Was he afraid of something? Yes. Or of someone. But he wouldn't say. Poirot leaned slightly forward. And you, madam, have you ever doubted the authenticity of Lady Tremaine's pieces? Mrs. Vale's eyes darted toward the fireplace. No? I wouldn't know. She prizes them all. But she favors the cobra. She always has. Says it's the key to the whole collection. Key. Poirot repeated. She said it was the first. The piece that began everything. Poirot made a thoughtful hum. And yet it is now missing. Mrs. Vale glanced at her hands. I heard raised voices that morning before the body was found. They came from Lady Tremaine's study. I didn't hear names, just that someone was shouting about betrayal. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Merci, madame. That is most enlightening. His second interview was with Major Alton Elridge, whom Poirot found pacing irritably near the library. Have a seat, Major, Poirot said, motioning toward a nearby armchair. We shall not be long. I haven't much to tell, Elridge muttered, sitting with a grunt. The man was a scholar, not a soldier. Never trusted types who hide behind spectacles and footnotes. Did you quarrel with him? Elridge narrowed his eyes. We disagreed. He had a tendency to speak as if everyone else were beneath him. I asked him straight out once, was the cobra genuine or not? He said it didn't matter what I thought. A vague answer, Poirot noted. He made it clear he didn't trust anyone with the truth. Said some objects bring danger if handled without reverence. Damned mystical rubbish. Did he mention any one person by name? No, but he wasn't fond of the solicitor, Par. Said lawyers only care about ownership, not origin. Poirot regarded him steadily. And what were you doing at the time of the scream? In the smoking room. With a cigar. I heard Iris scream and came running. Poirot gave a small nod. Thank you, Major. That will suffice, for now. Mr. Nathaniel Parr was next. The solicitor looked distinctly paler than the day before. You said yesterday you barely knew the professor, Poirot said as they settled in a study lined with legal tomes. And yet he referenced lawyers in unkind terms. Parr hesitated. He had an inflated sense of self. He asked about inheritance laws, particularly relating to disputed property. I assumed he was trying to make a point. Did you advise Lady Tremaine recently to amend her will?
Yes.
But nothing was signed. She was considering several changes. To remove Iris Marsh?
Poirot flushed. Possibly.
But she was also considering leaving her collection to a museum. She believed someone close to her was pressuring Iris, perhaps for marriage. That seemed to disturb her greatly. Poirot tilted his head. And did she say who she suspected?
No, per mater.
Only that she trusted very few people in this house. Poirot's fingers tapped gently on the arm of his chair. And where were you during the incident?
In the study.
Reading a contract. Alone. A pity, Poirot murmured. Solitude makes for the weakest alibi. Poirot saved Iris Marsh for last. She sat across from him in the garden salon, eyes hidden behind smoked glass spectacles. You have been unusually poised for someone who found a dead man, Poirot said quietly. I cope with horror by acting, she replied. You might try it. Poirot allowed himself a smile. Tell me, mademoiselle, have you ever held the cobra sculpture? She blinked. Of course not. Aunt Letitia wouldn't allow it. Only Flinch touched them. And yet, Poirot said gently, someone did.
Recently.
With great care. She frowned. You think I took it? I think you know who did. I believe that's why you are frightened. She went still. Poirot leaned forward. Who were the voices you heard? I told you I didn't know. But now you do. You've remembered. A long pause. Then she whispered, one of them was Flinch. Poirot's brows lifted. Merci. You are very brave. Chapter 6, The First False Lead. The clouds gathered thickly above Renfield Hall, a brooding grey dome that seemed to press upon the gables and mullioned windows. Inside, the atmosphere had grown taut, as though the house itself were listening, watching. Somewhere within its walls, Poirot believed, the missing cobra lay hidden. And perhaps, also, a motive that had not yet fully uncoiled. He spent the morning in the conservatory, retracing every step described by Iris Marsh and the others. The shattered panther had been swept away, but Poirot could still see the faint marking of impact on the tiled floor, a pale spiderweb of fracture. He examined the velvet pedestal where the glass cobra had once stood. The dust told him more than words could. There were no fingerprints on the pedestal's edge, but a small, crescent-shaped disturbance in the velvet, barely visible under angled light, told him that someone had lifted the piece delicately with gloved hands. Ah, Poirot murmured, a thief who is also a connoisseur. Très intéressant. He moved next to the professor's room. The door creaked as he entered. It had remained undisturbed since the constable's initial inspection. The desk was still littered with a scattering of notes, most of them in an orderly hand. Yet Poirot noticed one page half burned in the fireplace. Retrieved with tongs, it yielded only partial words. Too dangerous, not a replica. Letitia must not know. There was no signature. No date. But the implications whispered to Poirot like the rustle of a serpent's scale. A knock came at the door. It was Inspector Graves, summoned quietly from the county constabulary. He was a square-jawed man with the demeanor of a half-woken bear and a soft spot for tea biscuits. He entered with a clipboard and a cautious glance around the room. Still poking about? He said. Thought you might have wrapped this up by now. Poirot lifted an eyebrow. A man is dead. A priceless artifact is missing. And our suspects grow quieter, not louder. Non mon ami, I have only begun. Graves consulted his notes. Preliminary report says death was blunt trauma to the back of the head. No defensive wounds. Someone caught him unawares. Or someone he trusted, Poirot replied. Do you have the list of who had access to the conservatory keys? Only 2 sets exist. One held by Lady Tremaine. The other by the butler, Flinch. Poirot considered this. And where is Flinch? Gone, Graves said grimly. Left the house the evening of the murder. No word since. His room was cleared of personal items, but we found a single key left on the nightstand. Left, Poirot repeated. Deliberately. Graves nadie. You think he stole the cobra? I think, said Poirot slowly, that someone made him believe he had no other choice. The focus turned to Flinch's quarters. A modest room, sparsely decorated, but neat as a pin. Poirot examined the wardrobe, the drawers, and the lining of an old leather suitcase still under the bed. Inside the suitcase was a single item left behind, a pressed violet envelope. Poirot extracted it carefully and read the contents. You were never meant to see the invoice. She finds out, she will destroy us both. Take it and go. Leave before she changes her mind. Inside. The paper was of fine quality, the sort found in Lady Tremaine's study. Inspector Graves leaned over his shoulder. Blackmail? Possibly, Poirot said. Or protection. But the question remains, what was the professor about to expose? Graves Whodunit. Could he have discovered the sculptures weren't authentic? That, Poirot said, would explain much, but not all. There is something more specific here. Something about the cobra. He turned to the window, lost in thought. The cobra had been the first piece in the menagerie. The professor was preparing to write a monograph. And the missing page from his notes had warned, not a replica. Not a replica, but that suggested someone had claimed it was. To protect the secret? To protect someone else? Poirot turned abruptly. We must examine Lady Tremaine's study. Graves looked uneasy. Are you certain? She's a formidable woman. Poirot gave a tight smile. Just so. And formidable women often leave formidable footprints. The study was dark-paneled and filled with quiet power. Bookshelves held histories of antiquities and treatises on curation. But Poirot's eye fell upon the writing desk. A locked drawer yielded to a slim tool Graves produced with reluctant pride. Inside were letters. Dozens, some brittle with age. But one bundle, tied with a red ribbon, bore a more recent date. It was addressed in the professor's careful hand. Letitia, I cannot remain silent any longer. The piece you gave to the museum in 1931, the one you claimed as the original cobra, is a forgery. You replaced it with the real piece to keep it in your private collection. You swore to secrecy, but I cannot go on living a lie. Poirot exhaled. Mon Dieu, he said softly. This is no longer merely a theft. It is a scandal decades in the making. Inspector Graves swore under his breath. She committed fraud? Poirot nodded. And the professor, racked with guilt or perhaps jealousy, was ready to confess. Someone feared what would follow. The cobra was not just valuable, it was evidence. And Flinch? Poirot's voice dropped. I believe Flinch stumbled upon something. And I believe someone ensured he disappeared, voluntarily or not. He turned back to the empty pedestal in the conservatory. The serpent, he murmured, has indeed shed its skin. But I begin to see the shape beneath. Chapter 7. Secrets in the Glass. Poirot stood motionless beneath the vaulted ceiling of the conservatory, arms folded neatly behind his back, gazing once again at the empty pedestal where the chromatic glass cobra had once coiled in iridescent pride. Rain pattered softly against the stained glass panels overhead, casting flickering pools of color across the tiles like spilled jewels. He had spent the morning tracing the history of the menagerie, not in archives or files but in conversations. Conversations that revealed, in tone and omission more than words, the quiet tensions within Renfield Hall. Lady Tremaine's longtime companion, Miss Eudora Cray, had proved particularly instructive. I never liked that cobra, she had murmured in her brittle voice as she poured tea with a hand that trembled only slightly. It was unnatural. It didn't belong with the others. I told Letitia so years ago. But she wouldn't hear it. Said it was the soul of the collection. The first piece. The only one that mattered. And Professor Litchfield? Poirot had asked, watching her eyes. He and Letitia had a complicated friendship. He was obsessed with the past and she preserved appearances. Between them they kept many secrets, I think. Poirot had nodded politely, but his thoughts were already turning. Now, standing alone once more, he opened his notebook and turned to a clean page. He wrote a single word at the top. Replica? Then below it a list. Lady Tremaine, donated replica, to museum in 1931. Real cobra kept, hidden in plain sight. Litchfield complicit? Or blackmailed? Flinch discovered the truth? Who sent the violet letter? Asterisk asterisk. Poirot tapped his pencil against the paper. The missing cobra was not just a sculpture, it was proof. Proof of a deception that, if revealed, could ruin a reputation carefully curated over half a century. The letter from Litchfield to Letitia was damning. But why reveal the truth now after so many years? Unless... Poirot turned sharply as a soft step echoed behind him. Iris Marsh stood in the conservatory doorway, dressed in pale blue, her expression guarded. Am I intruding, Monsieur Poirot? Not at all, mademoiselle. Come, let us speak. I believe there is much you know and more you suspect. She hesitated, then stepped inside, folding her arms tightly across her chest. I only know what I've seen. And what I've heard, whispers, fragments. No one ever tells the whole truth in this house. Not even Aunt Letitia. Yet you, perhaps, have begun to piece it together? Her lips pressed into a line. I saw Professor Litchfield and Aunt quarreling the day before he died. It was early evening. They were in the library and I was in the hallway. He was angry, really angry. Said she had lied to him for too long. I didn't hear all of it, but she said something like, "You owe me this silence." And he said, "Not anymore." Poirot's brows lifted slightly. Did your aunt know you overheard? I don't think so. But I told you, Dora. She said it was none of my concern and that I should forget I heard anything. Poirot considered this. Your aunt, does she frighten you, Mademoiselle Iris? She hesitated. She does not frighten me exactly. But she controls everything. Everyone. Even now, she speaks as if nothing's happened. No tears for Professor Litchfield, no grief. Only her composure. And you? You grieve for him? Iris's voice dropped to a whisper. He was kind to me. The only one in this house who listened. Poirot nodded solemnly. Then perhaps it is time you listened as well. Not to others, but to what your heart knows already. You must tell me everything. Especially about the glass. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? I believe someone removed the real cobra long before the murder. Perhaps weeks ago. But to do so without raising suspicion, they would need to replace it with something identical. Something forged. The professor may have noticed this change. And I believe you may have noticed too. She shook her head slowly, then stopped. Wait, there was something. A few days ago I was dusting the conservatory. The light struck the cobra strangely, it shimmered differently. Less violet, more amber. I thought it was just the angle. But then I mentioned it to Flinch. And what did he say? Her eyes widened. He seemed alarmed. Said I must be mistaken. But the next day he avoided me entirely. Poirot let out a soft breath. The pieces clicked into place with the quiet precision he so cherished. A swapped artifact. A growing suspicion. A guilty conscience, and someone desperate to silence it. He turned to the pedestal once more. The dust had been disturbed long before the day of the murder. And the cobra that was smashed that day, if it was even the real one, was no longer present. Only its absence remained. Poirot closed his notebook with a snap. Mademoiselle Iris, he said gently, you have been most helpful. But I must ask one final thing. Did you ever enter the study in the days before the professor's death? I did, she admitted. To fetch a book for Miss Cray. Why? Poirot offered a small smile. Because it confirmed something I suspected. The letter the professor wrote, someone else read it before it was hidden away. Someone who feared what it meant. He tipped his head. And now, I believe it is time I spoke again with Lady Tremaine. This time not as her guest, but as her accuser. Chapter 8, The Lady's Mask. Lady Tremaine sat in the drawing room, a silver tray of untouched lemon biscuits resting beside her. She was, as always, impeccably composed, her posture erect, her expression serene, and her lips painted the faintest rose. The fire flickered gently in the hearth, casting warm shadows that danced across the walls. Poirot entered without announcing himself. She glanced up from her embroidery. Monsieur Poirot. You return with a furrowed brow. That cannot bode well. Poirot bowed slightly. Madam, I come seeking clarity. The truth, it evades me still, but it draws nearer. Shall we speak plainly? I have always spoken plainly, she replied. But I cannot promise I will indulge gossip. Then perhaps let us begin not with gossip, but with fact. The glass cobra, when did you last see it? Her needle paused mid-air. The morning before Charles was found. I passed through the conservatory and admired it as I always do. It was quite intact then. Was it true? Poirot leaned forward. Or had it already been replaced? The room chilled slightly. Lady Tremaine's gaze sharpened. I don't understand you. I believe the sculpture that was shattered was not the original but a replica, crafted, perhaps, with astonishing skill but not the same soul. You see, the hues were not quite right, even by your own niece's observation. Tell me, Lady Tremaine, what became of the real cobra? She set her embroidery aside with deliberate care. You suggest a deception. I suggest only what the evidence compels. You donated the original cobra to the British Museum in 1931, but that piece, it was never catalogued. And yet the cobra reappeared in your menagerie within a year. Her smile was faint but brittle. It was returned to me as a gesture of goodwill. An error in acquisition. But no record exists of such an error. No documentation. The museum would never release an artifact of such value without a paper trail. Do you imagine I stole it back, Monsieur Poirot? She said coolly. I imagine you found yourself unwilling to part with it. Perhaps your late husband pulled strings, or perhaps you found another means. What matters is that the professor knew or suspected this, and someone feared what might come of that knowledge. She stood, smoothing her skirt with a graceful sweep of her hands. You accuse me of murder. I accuse no one, yet. But I do believe Professor Litchfield confronted you. I believe he threatened exposure not for gain but perhaps from wounded pride. And someone in this house thought silence was preferable to scandal. There was a long pause. Then her voice dropped. Charles was a difficult man. Brilliant but consumed by his own moral compass. He believed secrets were poisons that must be drained. But some secrets, her eyes found Poirot's. Some protect more than they harm. He waited, his silence inviting her to continue. But she did not. Instead, she stepped toward the mantel, reaching for a framed photograph, an old one, sepia-toned. It showed her, younger and unguarded, standing beside a tall man with a hawkish face and a sharp, intelligent smile. My husband, she said. And Charles. This house was their shared creation. The menagerie was their shared passion. But the cobra, that was mine. A wedding gift and more than that, a symbol. A symbol of what? She turned. Control. Poirot's brows arched subtly. I have spent decades curating an image, a family legacy. I built something permanent from the fragments of grief and disappointment. That cobra reminded me who I had once been, a girl unafraid to take what she desired. And flinch? Poirot asked softly. He may have discovered the truth, yes? She exhaled slowly. He found a letter in the professor's wastebasket, torn but not destroyed. He showed it to Eudora. She warned me. And yet you did not confront the professor? There was nothing to confront. He had made up his mind. But I did not kill him, Monsieur Poirot. I had no need. Poirot nodded once, slowly. Perhaps. But someone believed otherwise. Someone who thought silence was the greater virtue. At that moment, a knock sounded at the door. It creaked open and Miss Eudora Cray stepped inside, her face pale. Lady Tremaine, she said softly, there's an inspector from the county constabulary. He's asking questions about Flinch's time of death. It appears, she swallowed. It appears there was bruising on the back of his skull. Lady Tremaine's hands trembled just once. Poirot turned to her. So, Flinch was murdered. She said nothing but her stillness spoke volumes. Poirot bowed. Merci, madame. I believe the truth will come to light soon enough. I ask only one favor, keep your house calm for one more day. He turned to leave but paused at the doorway. There is still one more figure I must speak with, he said. One whose role has been quiet, perhaps too quiet. Lady Tremaine's eyes narrowed. And who is that? Poirot smiled faintly. The gardener, madam. Mr. Geoffrey. For I suspect even the plants may have seen what others chose to ignore. Chapter 9. Beneath the Ivy's Shadow. The garden stretched like a forgotten chapel beneath the early afternoon sky, its paths moss-worn and its hedges thick with ivy. A fine mist clung to the roses and the weathered statues that adorned the borders of Lady Tremaine's estate. Poirot stepped carefully along the gravel walkway, avoiding damp patches and overgrown roots, until he reached the modest brick gardener's cottage nestled near the rear orchard. He knocked once, politely. Geoffrey answered a moment later, his sleeves rolled and hands stained with peat. His eyes, gray and weary, flicked to Poirot's face with faint recognition. You're Belgian, aren't you? He said. The detective. Poirot inclined his head. Oui. Hercule Poirot at your service. Come to interrogate the help? Geoffrey asked with dry resignation. He stepped aside, motioning Poirot in. The interior was simple, a clean table, some hanging herbs and a faint smell of tobacco. A kettle steamed faintly on the iron stove. Eh? Geoffrey offered. No, merci. I come not to interrogate but to observe. And perhaps to listen. Geoffrey sat, elbows resting heavily on the table. You'll find little worth hearing from a gardener, I think. That I doubt very much, Poirot said. You have the eyes of one who sees all but speaks seldom. Geoffrey gave a short, tired chuckle. You're not wrong. Poirot let silence hang for a moment before speaking again. Tell me, Monsieur Geoffrey, what do you make of the cobra's shattering? The gardener frowned. A shame. I've looked after that conservatory for 15 years. That sculpture always gave me the chills. Beautiful but unnatural. Did you notice any change in it before the night it broke? Geoffrey scratched his beard. Maybe. Can't say for certain. Something about the color was off, used to catch the sun like a live thing.
Lately it seemed duller. Poirot's eyes brightened. Ah. You noticed what others only guessed. The gardener looked at him sidelong. You think it was switched? I think someone wished to protect the original. Or hide it. And I believe someone else discovered that secret. Geoffrey leaned forward. You mean Flinch? Perhaps. Or even Professor Litchfield himself. Tell me, what did you see that night? Geoffrey looked hesitant, but Poirot's patient gaze held him in place. I was tending the jasmine beds by moonlight, he said at last. I like to work in the cool. Around 11:30, I saw shadows moving inside the conservatory. I didn't think much. Sometimes Miss Cray takes her walks there. But then, I heard voices. Low and angry. Couldn't make out words. 2 voices. Poirot asked quickly. Yes. One was the professor. I know his voice well, he talked to me about botany when no one else cared. The other was a woman. Calm but sharp. Could have been Lady Tremaine. Or Miss Cray. Could it have been Miss Iris? Geoffrey shook his head. No. Too poised. Poirot nodded slowly. And then I heard a crash. Glass breaking. I rushed closer, but by the time I reached the door, the lights were out. I saw someone slip out the side, dark coat, quick steps. I can't swear to who. Poirot absorbed this quietly. Did you see Flinch that night? The gardener hesitated again. Yes. Around midnight. He was coming from the stables carrying a little satchel. I looked nervous. I nodded to him, he barely looked up. And in the morning? Gone. I heard later what happened. Poirot folded his hands. There is more, is there not? Geoffrey's voice lowered. I found something. 2 days later. Behind the shed. He stood and walked to a cupboard, unlocking it with a small brass key. From within, he drew a cloth bundle and placed it carefully before Poirot. Unwrapping it revealed a single glass fong, slender, iridescent, and unmistakably part of the cobra sculpture. Buried in the soil, Geoffrey said. Someone tried to hide it. But they didn't bury it deep enough. Poirot studied it with reverence. This is from the original. So it was switched, Geoffrey murmured. Poirot looked up. Oui. But the question remains, why? And why kill Flinch, who might only have suspected the truth? Geoffrey met Poirot's eyes. You think whoever switched the cobra also killed him? I think, Poirot said slowly, that Flinch became an inconvenient witness. And so too did the professor. But what neither of them knew was who they were threatening. They saw only fragments. Poirot stood. Merci, Monsieur Geoffrey. Your eyes have seen more than you know. It is often the quiet ones who preserve the truth. Geoffrey nodded. Do you know who did it? Poirot smiled faintly. I am assembling the final pieces. The picture is nearly complete. As he stepped out into the cooling afternoon, the ivy brushed against his arm, like fingers pulling at a coat sleeve. Poirot turned back toward the great house, his mind racing. The serpent had shed its skin. Now he only had to name the one who had nurtured it in secret. Chapter 10. The Truth Encased in Glass. The late afternoon sun hung low, casting golden rays through the stained glass windows of the drawing room, painting long pools of amber and rose across the parquet floor. Poirot stood at the window, hands folded behind his back, gazing out at the gardens beyond, though his mind was far from the view. Lady Tremaine sat stiffly on the settee, nursing a cup of untouched tea. Across from her, Miss Cray watched Poirot with an expression caught between curiosity and defiance. Professor Litchfield, pale and anxious, occupied a corner armchair, fingers twitching against his knees. Iris hovered by the mantel, her gaze darting to each in turn like a wary sparrow. I have asked you all here, Poirot said at last, turning, because I believe the moment has arrived for clarity. The shadows, they are lifting. Have you discovered something new? Asked Lady Tremaine, her tone carefully neutral. Not discovered, madam. But connected. Hercule Poirot, he observes, he arranges, he deduces. And now he understands. He crossed to the glass case that still stood at the heart of the room, where the shattered replica of the glass cobra had been replaced by an empty velvet pedestal. Let us begin here with this serpent. A singular sculpture of curious beauty. We know now it was switched, a forgery replacing the original. What? That is the question. Perhaps Finch was after money, muttered Litchfield. He'd have known its value. Indeed, the idea of a theft is logical, Poirot said. But there is a difficulty. The forgery was not recent, it had been in place for weeks. And yet the thief remained silent, took no steps to sell the original. He turned, eyes sweeping the room. No, messieurs et mesdames. This was no theft. This was a substitution done to protect something. Or someone. Protect. Miss Cray asked with a raised brow. From what? Poirot raised a finger. From exposure. You see, the original cobra had been altered. Its hues, they were fading, chemically tampered with. The change was delicate but deliberate. A sharp silence fell. Poirot continued. Professor Litchfield noticed this. He confided in Flynch, who became convinced something was amiss. Perhaps he feared scandal. Perhaps he feared for Miss Iris, whose engagement could be endangered by such a disgrace. Iris flushed. I had no idea. I believe you, mademoiselle, Poirot said gently. But Flynch, he may have acted. He questioned. He found something, perhaps a piece of the original sculpture. He confronted someone. He looked directly at Miss Cray. You, mademoiselle. Cray laughed once, a brittle sound. I think not. You were the second voice Geoffrey heard that night. And it was you whom Flynch met in the stables later, not to conspire, but to beg for silence. Lady Tremaine stiffened. Flynch told you this? Non, madame. He told no one. That was his mistake. He went alone. Poirot approached the fireplace and lifted the iron poker. You see, Flynch died from blunt trauma, struck from behind. The murderer was precise and quick and needed strength. Not brute strength, but conviction. I believe he suspected too much and the killer panicked. Cray's face paled, but she did not speak. Poirot's voice softened. It was not the theft that mattered. It was the falsification. The original sculpture, believed to be the final work of Iris's late father, was altered to make it appear as though it were fading, decaying, worthless. Professor Litchfield stood. But why sabotage it? To discredit the memory of the artist, Poirot said, turning to him. To end the myth that his work was timeless. And with that myth shattered, the fortune tied to it would crumble and shift. His eyes returned to Lady Tremaine. She did not move. Poirot said quietly, the fortune would return to your control, madam. No need to watch it pass to your stepdaughter and her intended. A beat passed. Then Lady Tremaine rose with icy composure. You are quite mistaken, Monsieur Poirot, she said. Poirot inclined his head slightly. Then you will not object to my opening the safe in your study? I believe the real cobra is there, still carefully wrapped in muslin, with a thin chemical glaze across its surface, and fingerprints yet untouched. Lady Tremaine's lips parted. No, I thought not. Cray stepped forward suddenly, voice tight. She didn't kill Flynch. Poirot looked at her. It was me, Cray said. I didn't mean to. He followed me shouting. I thought he would tell everyone. I hit him. Just once. Lady Tremaine closed her eyes. You see, Cray whispered. We only wanted to stop the madness. Poirot sighed. But mademoiselle, madness it became. Chapter 11, The Confession and the Lie. There was a brittle stillness after Miss Cray's declaration. The kind that clung in the air like static before a storm. Poirot, never one to be swayed by theatrical revelations, folded his hands calmly and watched Cray with the focused gaze of a surgeon. I see, he said softly. And so, mademoiselle, you wish us to believe that you alone struck the fatal blow? Miss Cray's jaw tightened. Yes, I did it. I panicked. Flynch was shouting. I thought he would ruin everything. I didn't mean to kill him. And you disposed of the body in the pond unaided? Cray hesitated only briefly. Yes. Poirot raised a brow. You who sprained your wrist last year and have barely lifted a box since. You carried a man's body across the grounds without leaving a trace, and concealed it with such skill that even the dogs did not notice. The silence returned. Cray swallowed. I was stronger than I thought. Adrenaline. Lady Tremaine's voice was cool and low. Miss Cray is mistaken. She's trying to protect me. I told her to say nothing. Poirot turned toward her, arms folded. So now you claim responsibility, madam? A wry smile touched her lips. Why not? You've already painted me as the villain. No, Poirot said gently but firmly. I paint only what is revealed by the light. And right now that light shows two protectors, but no truth. Lady Tremaine's smile faded. Iris, who had remained by the hearth, looked between them in bewilderment. Miss Cray didn't do it, she said quietly. And neither did my stepmother. They're both lying. Poirot's eyes flicked to her. Why do you say this, mademoiselle? Iris hesitated. Because it doesn't make sense. Flynch wouldn't have threatened anyone. He was quiet, gentle. Even if he had found out something, he'd have gone to the professor, or to me. Poirot nodded. Exactly.
It is not in his nature to blackmail or intimidate. But it is in someone's interest to suggest that he did. He turned suddenly to Professor Litchfield. You were closest to him, were you not? The professor blinked. Yes. We often worked late. But surely you don't think? No, Poirot said, stepping toward him. Not the murder, perhaps. But you did alter the sculpture. Litchfield paled. Poirot, I saw the receipts from a chemical supplier in your study. Rare compounds designed to age glass artificially. You applied them carefully, testing their reaction, hoping to create what? A scandal? No, the professor cried. Not a scandal. A legacy. Do you understand? Ewan Tremaine's work was ordinary, but flawed. A single piece made him a myth. I only meant to accelerate what was already happening. The color decay was real, just slow. Poirot's expression was unreadable. So you hastened the rot, he said. Litchfield lowered his eyes. Poirot turned back to the others. And that is where the truth begins. Professor Litchfield, in his misguided admiration, doctored the sculpture. Flinch discovered it and confided in Cray. Perhaps they agreed to protect Iris, or perhaps they disagreed. He paused. But neither of them killed Flinch. A soft sound broke the air, something between a breath and a whimper. All eyes turned to Iris. She looked stricken, frozen. Poirot approached her slowly. You followed Flinch that night, didn't you, mademoiselle? You saw him meet someone at the stables. She shook her head, trembling. I didn't know. I thought he was hiding something from me. I wanted to understand. But when I saw him there, arguing with someone, I couldn't see who. I ran. Poirot's voice was low. You saw more than you wished. Tears shimmered in her eyes. I heard the voice. It was Miss Cray's. But I couldn't believe it. Poirot turned to Miss Cray. So, you were there. But not alone. Cray gave no response. Poirot gestured toward the hearth. Shall I retrieve the other glove from behind the grate? Cray's eyes widened. You found it? Of course. One glove at the pond. One here. Blood on the cuff. Yours, not Flinch's. He scratched you, didn't he, in the scuffle? Her composure crumbled. Yes, she whispered. He did. Because you were trying to take something from him. A note? A photograph. Cray's eyes darted to Lady Tremaine. Ah, Poirot thought. He walked slowly to the center of the room. It was Flinch who uncovered the switch. He intended to tell Iris. That would have revealed not only the professor's role, but Lady Tremaine's complicity. Cray tried to dissuade him. They fought. He stumbled. She struck him, once. Poirot paused. But he didn't die then. Everyone stilled. Poirot looked at Lady Tremaine. You found him afterward, didn't you? No answer. You saw the opportunity. A terrible fall, but not fatal. He was dazed. Alive. You could have called for help. Instead, you ensured he would not speak again. Lady Tremaine's breath caught. Then quietly, yes. Poirot inclined his head. Merci, madame. Chapter 12, The Final Judgment. For a moment no one spoke. The confession hung heavy in the air, like the final toll of a bell. Poirot's gray eyes, sharp as the blade of a scalpel, remained fixed on Lady Tremaine. I did not strike him in anger, she said at last, her voice distant as if coming from another time. It was calculation, Monsieur Poirot. I saw him, injured, confused, clinging to the stable wall. He saw me and tried to speak. I silenced him. Iris gasped. You killed him? Lady Tremaine nodded, the movement slow. Yes. A silence fell, deeper than before. Poirot folded his hands behind his back. You saw in his condition a moment of opportunity, he said. Because his truth would have dismantled your house of influence, your hold over Iris, your legacy built upon her inheritance, her name. Lady Tremaine didn't deny it. Poirot turned toward the others. Miss Cray, your guilt was not for a murder, but for silence. You did not kill Flinch, but you concealed the truth. You struck him, yes, perhaps even in panic, but it was not fatal. The act of murder belongs solely to Lady Tremaine. Cray dropped her face into her hands. Why did you protect her? Iris asked softly, her voice shaking. Because she gave me a place when I had none, Cray said through clenched teeth. After my brother died, I had no family, no means. She took me in, offered me a position. I owed her everything, or so I thought. And now? Cray looked up, her eyes filled with years of confusion and loyalty twisted. Now I see I was just a pawn. As replaceable as a cracked vase in her drawing room. Poirot looked to Inspector Lyle, who had stood quietly through the scene, a notepad tucked in one hand.
You have heard all you need, I believe? The inspector nodded solemnly. Enough to make an arrest. Lady Tremaine stood, smoothing her skirt. There is no need for handcuffs, Inspector. I will come willingly. Poirot watched her closely, almost with pity. You have lived your life guarding secrets, madam. But this one, it was too great a burden. She gave a brittle smile. Burden? No, Monsieur Poirot. It was simply necessary. As Lyle escorted her gently from the room, Iris sat in stunned silence. Poirot turned to her. Mademoiselle, you must not carry this guilt, he said kindly. You are not responsible for the darkness others bring into their hearts. Iris looked at him with tear-filled eyes. But it was my name they were trying to protect. My legacy. My inheritance. Non, Poirot replied. It was never truly about you. It was always about power and fear and the desire to control beauty and history. Your stepmother was terrified of irrelevance. And the professor, he longed for permanence. You, mademoiselle, were simply the vessel they poured their dreams into. She gave a weak, sad smile. I feel like I've lived inside a glass case. Poirot tilted his head thoughtfully. Then perhaps it is time, Miss Tremaine, to step out of it? Break the glass, so to speak. There was a light rap at the door and Sloane the butler entered, clearly confused. Inspector Lyle asked that I secure Lady Tremaine's quarters, he said quietly. Shall I? Poirot nodded. Oui, monsieur. And may I suggest you begin with the safety behind the painting in her study? Sloane's eyes widened, but he said nothing more and withdrew. The room slowly emptied, but Poirot remained at the window. Outside, the sky had darkened into the evening. The garden pond, now cordoned off, reflected the indigo clouds above. Hastings stepped beside him. You knew all along, didn't you, Poirot? I suspected, Poirot said. But suspicion is not proof. The trick is to reveal the cracks, and wait for the truth to shine through. Hastings whistled softly. It's a wonder you don't take up sculpting yourself. Poirot gave a faint smile. Non, mon ami. My art is in order. In symmetry. In justice. Behind them, the fire had burned down to glowing embers, the glass figurines on the mantel casting faint rainbows onto the walls. Poirot glanced once more at the menagerie. So much beauty, he murmured. And yet so much is broken within. He turned on his heel, immaculate as ever, and crossed the room. Come, Hastings. We must telephone Chief Inspector Japp. I believe he will be most interested in this case of murder, deception, and, how do you say? La Verrerie Tragique. Chapter 12, The Final Judgment. For a moment no one spoke. The confession hung heavy in the air, like the final toll of a bell. Poirot's grey eyes, sharp as the blade of a scalpel, remained fixed on Lady Tremaine. I did not strike him in anger, she said at last, her voice distant as if coming from another time. It was calculation, Monsieur Poirot. I saw him, injured, confused, clinging to the stable wall. He saw me and tried to speak. I silenced him. Iris gasped. You killed him? Lady Tremaine nodded, the movement slow. Yes. A silence fell, deeper than before. Poirot folded his hands behind his back. You saw in his condition a moment of opportunity, he said. Because his truth would have dismantled your house of influence, your hold over Iris, your legacy built upon her inheritance, her name. Lady Tremaine didn't deny it. Poirot turned toward the others. Miss Cray, your guilt was not for a murder, but for silence. You did not kill Flinch, but you concealed the truth. You struck him, yes, perhaps even in panic, but it was not fatal. The act of murder belongs solely to Lady Tremaine. Cray dropped her face into her hands. Why did you protect her? Iris asked softly, her voice shaking. Because she gave me a place when I had none, Cray said through clenched teeth. After my brother died, I had no family, no means. She took me in, offered me a position. I owed her everything, or so I thought. And now? Cray looked up, her eyes filled with years of confusion and loyalty twisted. Now I see I was just a pawn. As replaceable as a cracked vase in her drawing room. Poirot looked to Inspector Lyle, who had stood quietly through the scene, a notepad tucked in one hand. You have heard all you need, I believe? The inspector nodded solemnly. Enough to make an arrest. Lady Tremaine stood, smoothing her skirt. There is no need for handcuffs, Inspector. I will come willingly. Poirot watched her closely, almost with pity. You have lived your life guarding secrets, madam. But this one, it was too great a burden. She gave a brittle smile. Burden? No, Monsieur Poirot. It was simply necessary. As Lyle escorted her gently from the room, Iris sat in stunned silence. Poirot turned to her. Mademoiselle, you must not carry this guilt, he said kindly. You are not responsible for the darkness others bring into their hearts. Iris looked at him with tear-filled eyes. But it was my name they were trying to protect. My legacy. My inheritance. Non, Poirot replied. It was never truly about you. It was always about power and fear and the desire to control beauty and history. Your stepmother was terrified of irrelevance. And the professor, he longed for permanence. You, mademoiselle, were simply the vessel they poured their dreams into. She gave a weak, sad smile. I feel like I've lived inside a glass case. Poirot tilted his head thoughtfully. Then perhaps it is time, Miss Tremaine, to step out of it? Break the glass, so to speak. There was a light rap at the door and Sloane the butler entered, clearly confused. Inspector Lyle asked that I secure Lady Tremaine's quarters, he said quietly. Shall I? Poirot nodded. Oui, monsieur. And may I suggest you begin with the safety behind the painting in her study? Sloane's eyes widened, but he said nothing more and withdrew. The room slowly emptied, but Poirot remained at the window. Outside, the sky had darkened into the evening. The garden pond, now cordoned off, reflected the indigo clouds above. Hastings stepped beside him. You knew all along, didn't you, Poirot? I suspected, Poirot said. But suspicion is not proof. The trick is to reveal the cracks, and wait for the truth to shine through. Hastings whistled softly. It's a wonder you don't take up sculpting yourself. Poirot gave a faint smile. Non, mon ami. My art is in order. In symmetry. In justice. Behind them, the fire had burned down to glowing embers, the glass figurines on the mantel casting faint rainbows onto the walls. Poirot glanced once more at the menagerie. So much beauty, he murmured. And yet so much is broken within. He turned on his heel, immaculate as ever, and crossed the room. Come, Hastings. We must telephone Chief Inspector Japp. I believe he will be most interested in this case of murder, deception, and, how do you say? La Verrerie Tragique. Chapter 13, Shards and Shadows. The following morning brought with it a cold, silvery light that filtered through the tall windows of Tremaine House. The atmosphere was subdued, hushed, as though the great manor itself were mourning. Poirot, impeccably dressed as always, stood in the breakfast room with a cup of steaming chocolate in his hand, studying a porcelain saucer with more attention than the casual observer might deem warranted. Colonel Hastings entered, rubbing the sleep from his eyes and still visibly shaken from the events of the prior evening. She's really gone then? He asked. Lady Tremaine? Poirot replied, not looking up. Yes. Inspector Lyle delivered her to the county jail last night. I believe she surrendered with dignity, though not, I think, with remorse. She didn't even look at Iris, Hastings muttered. Didn't say goodbye. How can someone be so cold? Poirot set the saucer down carefully. The heart, mon ami, can become a fortress of ice when it has been ruled by pride for too long. Lady Tremaine lived for control. In losing it, she chose to exit her life stage before the curtain could fall on her terms. Hastings frowned and reached for a slice of toast. So, that's the end of it then. Lady Tremaine murdered Flinch, Miss Cray was an accomplice, and the curious tale of the glass menagerie is finished. Poirot raised a finger. Non, Hastings. There is yet one more scene in this little drama. For we have dealt with the who and even the why but not the how. And you know I cannot bear a tale with unresolved symmetry. Just then Iris entered. Her pale face was composed, but her eyes bore dark crescents beneath them. Monsieur Poirot, she said, her voice steady, I wonder if you might walk with me. There is something I must ask you. Poirot inclined his head. But of course, mademoiselle. They stepped into the east corridor, where the stained glass panels caught the morning sun and splintered it into fractured color across the parquet floor. The very same corridor where only days before Flinch had fallen. I couldn't sleep last night, Iris confessed. I kept turning it over in my head, what you said about my stepmother. About power and fear. You have inherited more than a house, Poirot replied. You have inherited a truth. And that, Miss Tremaine, is more valuable than any glass figurine. She gave a faint, ironic smile. And far more fragile, it seems. They turned into the conservatory where the glass menagerie still stood, untouched, save for one notable absence. The silver kraken. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Ah, he said softly. The shadow of the missing creature still haunts the collection. It's never turned up, Iris said. No one knows what happened to it. I do, Poirot said quietly. She looked up, startled. You do? I believe it was never stolen, Miss Tremaine. At least, not in the way you think. He stepped closer to the cabinet, his gloved finger pointing to a subtle scuff on the bottom shelf. There. A mark where something once stood. But look, do you see how the dust settles only partially around it? She nodded. That tells us it was moved recently, after Flinch's death, but before the arrival of the police. I believe Lady Tremaine removed the kraken not to sell it, but to hide it, because within its base was concealed something incriminating. Something Flinch discovered. Iris's eyes widened. But what could that be? Poirot turned to her, his voice soft but urgent. A deed. A document. Perhaps a letter. I do not know the precise nature. But I am certain she feared Flinch would use it to destroy her, or at least tarnish her legacy. They fell into silence. The glass menagerie gleamed all around them, glistening with cold beauty. After a moment, Poirot added, she hid the kraken before the police could catalogue it. Likely in her private study. Inspector Lyle will find it, I am certain. Iris lowered her head. Thank you, she whispered. You've given me the truth. I didn't think I wanted it, but now I see I needed it. Poirot nodded solemnly. Truth is a difficult companion, but a necessary one. As they stepped back into the corridor, the sun caught Poirot's lapel pin, sending a flash of gold across the tiled floor. There remains only one last thing, he said. You must decide what to do with Tremaine House. She looked down the long hallway, her expression unreadable. Perhaps it is time to open its doors. To light its corners. To make it a place of healing, not hiding. Très bien, Poirot said warmly. You will honor its history by reshaping its future. They stood in silence for a moment longer, the hush of morning broken only by the soft ticking of a nearby clock. Outside, the trees whispered in the breeze, as if even the grounds of Tremaine House could sense the shift in fate. Chapter 14. The Kraken resurfaces. The late afternoon was thick with the scent of rain on stone as Hercule Poirot returned to Tremaine House, his polished shoes clicking softly against the flagstone path. He carried under his arm a sealed envelope from Inspector Lyle, evidence retrieved that morning from the secret drawer inside Lady Tremaine's escritoire. The missing silver kraken had been found at last, tucked carefully among outdated letters and yellowing estate ledgers, its base hollowed just as Poirot had predicted. He entered the drawing room where Iris Tremaine waited, her hands clasped before her like a schoolgirl awaiting judgment. Gone was the tailored black morning dress of the prior days, she wore a modest dove-gray blouse and skirt, her face free of paint, her expression sober. Poirot handed her the envelope. It is yours now, mademoiselle. She hesitated. You're certain? I have seen its contents, Poirot said quietly. They are of great consequence, but it is not for me to act on them. Only to ensure they are brought to light. She opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single sheet of thick cream paper, bearing the signature of Rupert Tremaine, her father. Iris read aloud, her voice barely more than a whisper. In the event of my death, I leave Tremaine House and all associated holdings to my daughter, Iris Tremaine, without condition. Lady Helena Tremaine shall serve as trustee until Iris reaches the age of 25. She stopped stunned. She altered the will, Poirot murmured. Or suppressed this version. Likely she persuaded the solicitor to file an earlier draft instead. And you see, mademoiselle, it was not just pride that governed her actions. It was fear. Fear of you gaining full control. Iris blinked rapidly as though unable to absorb the enormity of it. All this time, she had no legal claim to the estate? Only temporary custodianship, which you surpassed a year ago. She must have realized you were becoming curious, growing bolder. Flinch, I believe, uncovered this will hidden inside the silver kraken. And for that he paid dearly. A silence stretched between them, weighted by years of deception. Poirot gently placed the figurine, the silver kraken, on the table before her. Its sinuous tentacles coiled delicately around a glass orb, its gleam unbroken despite all it had endured. I thought it represented danger, Iris said softly. But perhaps it represents something else entirely now. Yes, said Poirot, his eyes narrowing. It represents a secret kept too long, and now, finally, released. The door opened and Hastings stepped in, umbrella in hand and cheeks ruddy from the wet wind outside. Well, you were right as rain, Poirot, he announced. Inspector Lyle confirmed the notary's seal matches the one used by Rupert Tremaine's solicitor. No doubt it's authentic. They'll likely open a formal investigation into the old will's suppression. Justice, said Poirot, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve, has a curious way of slipping through cracks in stone. But eventually it rises. Hastings glanced at Iris and gave a small, apologetic smile. "Forgive me, Miss Tremaine. I didn't mean to speak so bluntly." She shook her head. "It's quite all right. I think I've grown used to blunt truths these past few days. In fact, I prefer them now." Poirot stood and buttoned his coat. "Then allow me to leave you with one last truth, mademoiselle. You have the opportunity to remake Tremaine House, not just in bricks and rooms but in spirit. You are no longer beholden to the past." She rose with him, the silver kraken still clutched in her hand. "I shall try, Monsieur Poirot. I can't promise to erase what came before, but I can promise not to run from it." "Wise," Poirot said approvingly. "It is not forgetting but remembering with clarity that permits us to move forward." As he turned to go, Iris followed him to the threshold. "One more thing," she said, her voice hesitant. "Do you think, has she ever loved me? Even in her own way?" Poirot paused, his hand resting on the polished brass knob of the door. "I believe," he said gently, "that Lady Tremaine loved what she could control. But you, Mademoiselle Iris, you were never meant to be possessed." With that, he bowed and stepped out into the grey dusk, Hastings close behind. They walked in companionable silence along the path toward the road where a hired car waited, engine idling softly. Tremaine House loomed behind them, its windows aglow, its long shadows receding as lamps flickered to life within. Hastings cleared his throat. "So, old man, where to now?" Poirot smiled faintly. "To London first. Then, who knows? Perhaps the next crime is already sending out ripples, like the kraken's tentacles beneath still water." And with that, they disappeared into the gathering mist, leaving behind the house of glass and secrets, and the woman now brave enough to claim both. Chapter 15, The Final Reflection. The carriage ride back to London was subdued, though not without thought. Poirot sat with his fingertips pressed together, eyes half closed but mind evidently whirring beneath the serene surface. Hastings, ever eager for conclusions, cleared his throat after nearly 10 minutes of silence. "Well," he said tentatively, "you haven't said much, Poirot. You solved the mystery, found the kraken, uncovered the motive, even revealed a false will. Seems all done and dusted." Poirot opened one eye. "Ah, but mon ami, that is the English way, to settle the earth while the roots remain tangled." Hastings blinked. "What roots?" "The emotional kind. You see, Hastings, crime does not exist in a vacuum. It is seeded in desperation, pruned by secrecy, and eventually blooms in violence. That poor Mr. Flinch, he was not the beginning but the end." "End of what?" Poirot leaned back, his gaze fixed on the blurred countryside beyond the carriage window. "Of Lady Tremaine's illusion of control. Her attempt to sculpt reality like glass, so pristine, so orderly but ultimately brittle." Hastings gave a low whistle. "It does explain her obsession with the menagerie, doesn't it?" "Indeed. Each piece is carefully chosen, representing people, moments, fears. But it was the kraken, that creature of legend and myth, that undid her. The symbol of a secret she could not contain." They rode in silence a little longer, broken only by the rhythmic clip of the horse's hooves. "Still," Hastings added, "there's something that bothers me. Lady Tremaine, why didn't she destroy the silver kraken completely? She must have known it contained the altered will." Poirot gave a small smile. "Because to destroy it would be to admit it existed. To herself most of all. She hoped to forget it, perhaps to convince herself it had never mattered." Hastings frowned. "But hiding it in the house? That was careless." "Non, mon ami. It was sentimental. Do not underestimate how tangled guilt and nostalgia can become. She could not bear to be parted from it entirely. It was Rupert's, her husband's, and the last true artifact of their broken trust." The carriage began its final stretch into the city, passing gas lamps flickering to life as the summer dusk descended. "And what of Iris?" Hastings asked. "Do you believe she'll take the house in a new direction?" Poirot folded his hands in his lap. "I believe she will try. And that is all any of us can do. Mademoiselle Tremaine has looked upon the abyss and chosen not to leap. That requires strength." Their driver halted outside Whitehaven Mansions, the familiar brick facade lit warmly from within. As Poirot stepped down and smoothed his coat, Hastings lingered a moment longer, still unsettled. "I suppose I'm just surprised it all unraveled the way it did. All for a will. All for control." Poirot turned to him. "It is rarely the large things, Hastings, that undo us. It is the small betrayals, the everyday silences. One hidden paper, one refusal to speak a kind word. These build upon each other until the foundation cracks." Hastings nodded solemnly, but a sudden thought struck him. Poirot, there's one thing you never explained. How did Flinch know about the Kraken's secret compartment? Ah, Poirot said, pausing at the door. That, my friend, is the final thread. He produced a small paper from his inner pocket and handed it to Hastings. It was a torn receipt from an antique restorer's shop in Surrey. 3 weeks before his death, Flinch took the silver Kraken there to have its base repaired. The craftsman noticed the hollow beneath a loose panel. Flinch must have realized what he'd stumbled on, and decided to confront Lady Tremaine. But she panicked. She struck him in the greenhouse, likely with the broken glass handle from a lantern, and left the body staged to appear as a suicide. The letter found in his pocket, you recall, it was meant to mislead. Hastings shook his head in disbelief. Good Lord. And to think it all came from a crack in the base of a figurine. Poirot looked upward as though addressing the ceiling. There are no small details, Hastings. Only small minds who overlook them. He stepped inside, ushering Hastings to follow. The lamps flickered on. The air was warm with the scent of bergamot and beeswax polish. As Hastings removed his coat, he glanced at Poirot, who was already arranging the evening paper just so upon his writing desk. Back to normal now? Hastings asked. Poirot gave a slight nod. Until the next crime, yes. But I think tonight perhaps we shall enjoy a small supper. I have a yearning for something simple, oafs and cocotte perhaps, and a little hot chocolate. And then, an early night. Sounds divine, Hastings agreed. As Poirot made his way to the kitchen, his voice floated back, gentle and knowing. But remember, Hastings, there are monsters in every house. Only some of them wear silver skins. Chapter 16, Beneath the Surface. Though Poirot had declared the matter closed, the case, like a particularly persistent ghost, refused to rest. The following morning brought a letter, hand-delivered and marked with a familiar seal, the Tremaine crest, etched in faded gold. Poirot accepted it without surprise. Lady Tremaine, he murmured, turning the envelope over. She still writes. Hastings, halfway through buttering his toast, looked up. What could she possibly have to say now? Poirot carefully slit the envelope. The letter inside was written in an elegant hand, each stroke as deliberate as her final act had been in revealing the Kraken. He read silently, lips pursed, brow subtly furrowed. Well? Hastings prompted after a moment. Poirot looked up, and there was a strange softness in his gaze. She invites us to the burial. Mr. Flinch. It is to be held tomorrow at a small chapel on the edge of Chiswick. But why? Flinch had no family left, no friends really apart from Iris. Lady Tremaine was his employer, not his kin. Poirot folded the letter. She says it is the least she can do. A final gesture of dignity, perhaps a way to atone. Hastings frowned. Do you believe that? Poirot rose, walking to the window where the city bustled in early motion. I believe guilt does peculiar things to people, mon ami. And though she is a proud woman, she is not without a conscience. The next afternoon the chapel proved to be a modest place, stone-clad, set between sycamores and quietude. Rain threatened overhead, a grey ceiling pressing low, but the ceremony proceeded without interruption. Lady Tremaine arrived in black, veiled and somber. Beside her stood Iris, her face pale but resolved. There were no other mourners. Only the vicar, Poirot, Hastings, and a gravedigger who stood respectfully off to one side. The service was short. Poirot bowed his head as the final rites were read. But his gaze, sharp as ever, did not miss the way Lady Tremaine's hands trembled, nor how Iris reached briefly to steal them. When the earth was filled, the mourners dispersed. But Lady Tremaine lingered. I owe you a word, Monsieur Poirot, she said quietly as Iris moved away with Hastings. Poirot inclined his head. It is not necessary, madam. But I insist. You uncovered my crime with precision. I do not excuse it, and yet I wonder. If I had not acted, if Flinch had exposed the truth, what would I have become in the eyes of my daughter? A mother who valued honesty, Poirot said gently. She gave a bitter laugh. You are kinder than I deserve. I am precise, madam. That is all. They stood in silence for a moment. Then, as if shedding years, she said, I once believed grief made me stronger. But it only taught me how to hide. Poirot said nothing. In such moments, silence was more powerful than any reply. As Lady Tremaine turned away, he called softly, And the menagerie? She hesitated. I shall have it dismantled. Sold perhaps. Or destroyed. The glass has seen enough shadows. Poirot nodded. They left the cemetery and rejoined Iris and Hastings. The air was turning colder. As they walked, Iris moved beside Poirot. You know, she said, I always sensed something wrong with that house. Not the kind of wrong you can point to. Just unease. I thought it was me. Poirot patted her hand.
No, mademoiselle.
It was the residue of secrets. And you were wise to sense them. She smiled faintly. I plan to start again. Sell the house. I'll keep one thing though.
Ah?
Poirot raised an eyebrow. The Kraken, she said. After the repairs it's quite beautiful. Not just for what it hides, but what it survived. Poirot bowed his head slightly and for once he said nothing more. Back at Whitehaven Mansions evening fell with a hush. Poirot sat with a book unopened on his lap, the clock ticking softly beside him. Hastings broke the quiet. So this is it then? Truly over? Poirot gave a small nod. The players have departed. The curtain has fallen. And the moral? Poirot looked thoughtful. That no truth stays buried forever. Sooner or later the tide returns, and with it, all that has been lost beneath. Hastings gave a low chuckle. Very poetic, old chap. Poirot smiled, then turned the page in his book, though his eyes remained far away. Chapter 17. A Last Unraveling. 3 days had passed since the quiet burial in Chiswick. Poirot was polishing his cufflinks with unusual intensity when Hastings returned from his morning constitutional, his cheeks ruddy from the wind. You'll never believe who I saw, he declared, closing the door behind him. Inspector Felton, lurking around Claridge's of all places. Poirot raised a brow. Claridge's, you say? Most curious. The inspector rarely strays from the yard without purpose. He was with a man I didn't recognize, Hastings added, settling into the armchair. Tall, sallow-faced, looked like he belonged behind a curtain more than in a hotel lobby. Poirot's hands paused. A man with an Eastern European bearing, perhaps? Yes, exactly. How did you? Poirot didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved to his writing desk, retrieving a slim envelope from beneath a stack of correspondence. Because, mon ami, I received a note this morning that mentioned a name I had not heard since the case began. One Mr. Anton Volodya. Hastings blinked. Who is he? An art smuggler, Poirot replied. Formerly of Prague, now a figure of considerable interest to Interpol. It seems Mr. Volodya once had dealings with none other than our late Mr. Flinch. The valet? No mere valet, Poirot said softly. He was a conduit. A quiet courier of rare items, sometimes stolen, sometimes forged. That crate he insisted on storing in the locked chamber? I suspected it held more than sentimental objects. But the Kraken was inside, Hastings said, frowning. Yes, and it was broken. Flinch claimed it was an accident, but I think in truth he smashed it deliberately. To hide something? Or to reveal something? You recall the shards had flecks of old wax in the base. Hastings nodded slowly. That wax once concealed a false bottom. Inside the hollow cavity there could have been a hidden cache, a document perhaps or a gem. Something small, valuable and easily concealed. By the time I examined the sculpture, it was already emptied. So where is it now? Poirot gestured to the window, where the city stretched like 1,000 secrets stacked atop each other. That is the question, Hastings. Flinch had an arrangement with Volodya, but perhaps he meant to double-cross him. Hide the treasure. Use Lady Tremaine's menagerie as camouflage. And she never knew? I doubt she understood Flinch's role fully. She saw him as an extension of the house, loyal, discreet, beneath notice. That was his power. There was a knock at the door. Miss Lemon entered, holding a telegram. This just arrived for you, Mr. Poirot. Marked urgent. Poirot opened it, his eyes scanning the brief lines. Then he smiled just a little. It appears Inspector Felton has arrested Mr. Volodya in possession of several forgeries and a ruby carved in the likeness of a kraken's eye. Hidden in a velvet pouch bearing Lady Tremaine's crest. Hastings exhaled. So Flinch did hide something. Poirot nodded. And perhaps, when he sensed danger closing in, he retrieved it from the sculpture, intending to flee. But Lady Tremaine cornered him first. Then she killed him for nothing? For something, Hastings. For the truth, which to her, was more dangerous than any jewel. He stood, brushing lint from his lapel. But now the final piece has fallen into place. The shadows are dispelled. Hastings rose too. Is it over then? Poirot smiled faintly. Yes, mon ami. The glass menagerie is shattered, its illusions exposed. And all that remains now is the dust. Chapter 18. The Last Reflection. The sitting room at Whitehaven Mansions was suffused with golden afternoon light. Poirot sat at his customary place by the window,
trimming a stray thread from his immaculate cuff. Across from him, Hastings sipped tea, his brow furrowed in thought. "Still thinking about the ruby?" Poirot asked gently. Hastings looked up. "I just can't believe it. All this time, that little Kraken sculpture was hiding something worth thousands. More than that, mon ami. Its value was not only in carats but in what it represented, proof of a larger smuggling network. For Lady Tremaine, it was the symbol of betrayal. For Flynch, of leverage. And for Valodia, of power." Poirot leaned forward and set down his cup with precision. But none of them understood the most important truth. Which was that their secrets, no matter how delicately wrapped, would always leave fingerprints. There was a knock. Miss Lemon entered quietly with an envelope. "From Scotland Yard, Mr. Poirot. Inspector Felton asked that you be informed." Poirot opened it, read and nodded. "As I suspected. Valodia has confessed to his involvement in smuggling artworks and rare stones through coded objects. The ruby, originally part of a tiara stolen in Florence, was reshaped by a master carver in Sofia and passed into Flynch's hands in Vienna. So Flynch wasn't just a servant. He was part of a ring. A courier, yes, but he was losing his nerve. He stayed on at Tremaine House longer than intended, perhaps developing a conscience or a fondness for safety. Either way, he kept the ruby." Hastings frowned. "But what about Lady Tremaine? Did she know all along?" Poirot shook his head. "She suspected only near the end. Her decision to have Flynch dismissed was no ordinary dismissal. She confronted him, and in that heated moment things turned fatal. The poker, the fire, the attempted cover-up with the spilled wine, it was a crime of emotion, not of calculation." "And the menagerie?" Poirot smiled wistfully. "It was always a metaphor, Hastings. Each figure, beautiful, delicate, an illusion of control. Lady Tremaine kept the collection under glass as if to hold time still. But time, like guilt, escapes. There was silence, broken only by the distant sound of carriages below. After a moment, Hastings said, "She'll hang." "No," Poirot said gently. "The doctors at St. Agnes's have already given their report. Her mind has deteriorated beyond repair. She will not stand trial. She will live out her days in quiet confinement, surrounded by shadows of memory." Hastings gave a long sigh. "A tragic ending." "Indeed," said Poirot. "But necessary." They sat quietly and then Poirot rose. He walked over to a small cabinet and opened a drawer. Inside was a single glass figurine, an iridescent seahorse with a silver fin. He placed it carefully on the mantel. Hastings looked at it. "One of Lady Tremaine's?" Poirot nodded. "The only piece spared. It was given to me by the constable cataloguing her effects. A token of thanks, perhaps." He adjusted its position until it caught the light just so. "You know, Poirot," said Hastings, "you always see what others miss." Poirot turned with a quiet smile. "Mais oui. Because I look not just with the eyes, Hastings, but with the little gray cells. They notice the tremble in a hand, the dust on a shoe, the silence where noise should be. And in those silences, the truth speaks." He stepped back, admired the figurine and then turned toward the window. Outside, the last light of day faded into a calm dusk. The case was closed. And once again Hercule Poirot had restored order from chaos.